The Imperial conquest vessel, Iron Resolve, hung in silent menace above Etheria, its massive hull blocking the planet's twin moons from view. On the command bridge, Colonel Kargan stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face illuminated by the soft blue glow of tactical displays. His eyes, calculating and cold, scanned the readouts of the lush planet below. Population centers identified Colonel, reported Lieutenant Daxon from the scanning station. Unusual energy signatures detected across the main continent. Nothing our systems can't handle. Kargan nodded satisfaction, evident in the slight curl of his lip. This would be his 27th planetary acquisition for the Interplanetary Empire. Another jewel to add to the crown, another resource-rich world to feed the ever-hungry maw of imperial expansion. Open communications. He ordered, his voice carrying the weight of countless successful conquests. Let's see if they'll surrender without unnecessary bloodshed. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the face of a human woman with determined eyes and the insignia of Major on her uniform collar. Her expression betrayed no fear, only a calm resolve that momentarily caught Kargan off guard. "This is Major Mira Owens, commander of the Etherian Alliance," she announced, her voice steady. "Your vessel has entered Etherian sovereign space without authorization. Withdraw immediately, or we will be forced to take defensive action." A ripple of amusement passed through the bridge crew. Defensive action from a single planet against an Imperial conquest vessel. The very notion was absurd. Kargan allowed himself a thin smile. "This is Colonel Kargan of the Imperial conquest vessel, Iron Resolve. Your world has been selected for integration into the Interplanetary Empire. Surrender your governing infrastructure and prepare for Imperial occupation. Resistance is not an option," Mira interrupted, her eyebrow arching slightly. "I've heard that particular line before, Colonel. My answer remains the same. Withdraw your vessel from our orbit." Fury flashed across Kargan's face at the interruption. No planetary representative had ever dared to speak over him during a conquest announcement. He turned to his weapons officer, Commander Vex. "Target their largest population center. Power weapons to demonstration level." Weapons powering Colonel Vex confirmed, fingers dancing across his console. On the view screen, Major Owens appeared unnervingly calm. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Colonel." "And why not?" Kargan sneered. "Because in approximately 3 seconds, you're going to lose power to your weapon systems," she replied, checking her wrist display. "Followed by your propulsion, and then your shields." Kargan barked a laugh. "Your primitive technology couldn't possibly—" The bridge lights flickered. Weapon station displays went dark. The low hum of the ship's engines, a sound so constant that most crew members had long ago ceased to consciously register it, suddenly vanished. "What's happening?" Kargan demanded, striding to the nearest console. "Weapons offline." Colonel Vex reported, frantically working his now-dimmed controls. "Propulsion failing. Shields collapsing. Sir, we're completely immobilized." Kargan whirled back to face the view screen where Major Owens waited patiently. "What have you done to my ship?" he snarled. "Nothing permanent," she assured him. "Just a little technology we've been developing since your Empire's last visit to our sector. You see, Colonel, we've had 10 years to prepare for this moment." 10 years, Kargan's mind raced. The Empire has never attempted conquest in this sector before. "Not a conquest, no," Mira agreed. "But one of your rescue vessels passed through a decade ago. The crew was quite forthcoming about Imperial expansion plans once we helped repair their damaged ship." Kargan's jaw tightened. This was unprecedented. No planet had ever been prepared for first contact with the Empire's conquest fleet. It simply didn't happen. "You have 30 minutes to withdraw from our orbit, Colonel," Mira continued. "After that time, we'll be forced to employ more permanent measures to ensure our security. I trust you'll make the right decision." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. "Options," Kargan demanded of his senior staff. Science Director Celine stepped forward, her tall frame tense with concentration. "Colonel, preliminary analysis suggests they're using some kind of targeted electromagnetic pulse technology But unlike anything in our databases, they've somehow managed to isolate specific systems while leaving life support and communications untouched. Can we counter it? Not without knowing more about the technology, Celine admitted. And not within 30 minutes. For the first time in his distinguished career as a conquest commander, Colonel Kargan faced the unthinkable retreat without conquest. The humiliation burned in his chest like acid. "Prepare emergency thrusters," he ordered through clenched teeth. "Get us out of orbit just far enough to restore our systems." "Yes, sir." His navigation officer acknowledged the relief in her voice, barely concealed. As the Iron Resolve limped away from Etheria on emergency power, Kargan stood rigid at the view screen, watching the blue-green planet recede. "This isn't over," he whispered. "Not by a long shot." 3 weeks later, Kargan stood before the Supreme Council of the Interplanetary Empire, the polished black floor beneath him, reflecting the stern faces of the 7 counselors seated on the elevated dais. The chamber's grandiose architecture, all sharp angles and imposing height, was designed to intimidate those called to report. Today, Kargan felt every centimeter of that intimidation. "Explain again, Colonel," demanded High Counselor Thrain, her voice echoing in the vast space, "how a single, previously uncontacted planet managed to disable our most advanced conquest vessel without firing a single shot." Kargan swallowed hard. The Etherians possessed technology we had not encountered before, High Counselor. They were also apparently forewarned of our eventual arrival. "By one of our own vessels," stated Counselor Rexon, disbelief evident in his tone. "A rescue vessel, not a conquest ship," Kargan clarified. "Its crew would not have been bound by the same protocols regarding information security." "Nevertheless," Counselor Varda interjected, "this represents an unprecedented failure. The Empire has conducted 263 successful planetary acquisitions over the past 2 decades. Your mission was meant to be routine." "There was nothing routine about Etheria," Kargan responded, perhaps more sharply than was wise. "They knew we were coming. They had prepared specifically to counter our technology." The High Counselor leaned forward, her piercing eyes fixing Kargan in place. "And what would you have us do now, Colonel? Abandon our expansion into that sector? Allow one planet to defy the might of the Empire?" Kargan hesitated. His career, perhaps his life, hung on his next words. "I believe we should reconsider our approach, High Counselor." A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. "Elaborate," Thrain commanded. "The Etherians possess technology that disabled our systems without causing damage. Technology we do not fully understand. Technology that might be valuable to the Empire." Kargan chose his words carefully. Perhaps in this instance, diplomacy might yield benefits that conquest cannot. Diplomacy. Counselor Rexon practically spat the word. "We are conquerors, Colonel, not negotiators." And yet, the quiet voice of Counselor Elira cut through the tension. "We are also pragmatists. If this world possesses technology beyond our current capabilities, there may be merit in Colonel Kargan's suggestion." High Counselor Thrain considered this for a long moment, her fingers steepled before her. "You suggest we talk to these Etherians as equals?" "As potential assets," Kargan replied carefully. "Their technology clearly has military applications that could strengthen the Empire's hold on existing territories." The council members exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "Very well, Colonel," High Counselor Thrain finally declared. "You will return to Etheria not as a conqueror, but as an envoy. You will assess their technological capabilities and determine whether they might serve the Empire's interests better as allies than as subjects." Kargan bowed, relief washing over him. "Thank you, High Counselor." "Do not thank me yet," Thrain warned. "If you fail in this mission, the consequences will be severe. The Empire does not tolerate repeated failure." "I understand." "And, Colonel," she added, as he turned to leave, "remember that diplomacy is merely another form of conquest. The Empire will have Etheria's technology one way or another. 2 months after his humiliating retreat, Kargan found himself aboard a much smaller vessel, approaching Etheria once more. This time, however, the ship bore diplomatic markings rather than conquest insignia, and Kargan himself wore the formal attire of an imperial envoy instead of his military uniform. "We're being hailed," Colonel reported Captain Rovar, who served as his communications officer for this mission. "Put it through," Kargan ordered, straightening his unfamiliar ceremonial jacket. Major Owens appeared on screen, her expression cautiously neutral. "Colonel Kargan, I must admit I'm surprised to see you again, especially in a diplomatic vessel." "The Empire has reconsidered its approach to Etheria," Kargan stated formally. "We request permission to dock at your orbital station for discussions regarding potential mutual interests." A flicker of surprise crossed Mira's face before she composed herself. "Permission granted, Colonel. Transmitting docking coordinates now. I'll meet you at Peace Station personally." The transmission ended, and Rovar turned to Kargan with undisguised skepticism. "Do you really believe this diplomatic mission will succeed, where conquest failed, sir?" Kargan's mouth tightened. "The High Council believes Etherian technology may be worth alternative approaches." "And what do you believe, sir?" Kargan considered the question for a long moment. "I believe in the Empire, Captain, and I believe in completing my mission whatever form it takes." Peace Station orbited Etheria like a silver crescent, its elegant curved structure, a stark contrast to the utilitarian designs favored by the Empire. As Kargan and his small delegation were escorted through its wide corridors, he noted the absence of visible weapons or security checkpoints, another departure from Imperial protocol. They were led to a circular conference room, whose transparent outer wall provided a breathtaking view of Etheria below. Major Owens waited inside, along with several other individuals in various styles of uniform. "Colonel Kargan," she greeted him, extending her hand in what he recognized as an ancient Earth custom. "Welcome to Peace Station." He hesitated before taking her hand, the gesture unfamiliar to him. "Major Owens, the Empire appreciates your willingness to engage in dialogue. Please sit." She indicated the round table at the center of the room. "Allow me to introduce my colleagues, Commander Jackson, our Chief of Defense, Dr. Elena Reyes, our lead scientist, and Ambassador Thel from the Outer Colonies, who has extensive experience with interplanetary relations." Kargan introduced his own smaller delegation, Captain Rovar Science Director Celine, and a junior diplomatic officer named Vin, before they all took their seats. "I must admit," Mira began, "when we disabled your ship 3 months ago, I didn't expect our next meeting to be under such civilized circumstances." "The Empire is adaptable," Kargan replied stiffly. "Is it?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "In our research, the Interplanetary Empire has followed the same conquest protocol for nearly 30 years. You identify a resource-rich world, arrive with overwhelming force, demand surrender, and then integrate the planet into your economic system with minimal regard for its existing culture or governance." Kargan felt his face flush with anger at her blunt assessment. "Our methods have proven effective." "Until Etheria," Dr. Reyes observed quietly. "Yes," Kargan acknowledged after a tense moment. "Until Etheria." Mira leaned forward. "Which brings us to the question, why are you really here, Colonel? What does the Empire want from us now that conquest has proven challenging?" "The Empire recognizes that Etheria possesses advanced technology, particularly in the field of targeted electromagnetic disruption. We're interested in exploring potential technological exchanges that might benefit both our civilizations." A knowing smile touched Mira's lips. "In other words, you want our ship-disabling technology." "Among other potential innovations, yes," Kargan admitted. Commander Jackson laughed a short, sharp sound. "So you can ensure it never works against your vessels again, and potentially deploy it against others who might resist your expansion? I think not." Kargan tensed, but before he could respond, Dr. Reyes spoke up. "Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle," she suggested. "Colonel, What if we could offer the Empire something even more valuable than our defensive capabilities? Kargan's interest was piqued, despite himself. Such as... Dr. Reyes exchanged glances with Major Owens, who nodded slightly. What would you say, the scientist continued, if I told you we've developed a faster-than-light drive system that's 3 times more efficient than the Empire's current technology? Science Director Celine couldn't suppress a gasp. That would be impossible. The Empire has the most advanced FTL systems in known space. Had, Dr. Reyes corrected gently. May I? She gestured to the display controls embedded in the table. At Mira's nod, a holographic projection appeared above the conference table, intricate schematics of what was unmistakably a revolutionary propulsion system. Even to Kargan's limited technical understanding, it was clear that this design represented a significant leap beyond Imperial technology. Science Director Selene leaned forward, her eyes wide with fascination. This modulation pattern for the tachyon field, I've never seen anything like it. And this containment system, she looked up at Dr. Reyes. If this works as designed, it would reduce fuel consumption by at least 60%, while increasing maximum velocity. 67% actually, Dr. Reyes corrected with a small smile. And it does work exactly as designed. We've been using it on our interplanetary vessels for the past 3 years. Kargan struggled to maintain his composure. This was far beyond what he or the High Council had anticipated. Such technology would revolutionize the Empire's capabilities, not just for conquest, but for trade resource transportation, even the movement of entire fleets. Why would you share this with us? He asked, suspicion edging his voice. After we attempted to conquer your world. Because we're not interested in conquest, Colonel, Mira replied simply. We're interested in cooperation, mutual benefit. We know the Empire isn't going away. Your civilization spans dozens of star systems. But perhaps we can offer an alternative to your current expansion model. What alternative? Ambassador Thel spoke for the first time, his deep voice resonating with diplomatic precision. An alliance, Colonel Kargan. Not subjugation, not integration, but a true alliance between equals. Kargan almost laughed at the absurdity. Equals Etheria is a single planet. The Empire controls 27 star systems. And yet, Mira pointed out quietly, here you sit at our table seeking our technology. The words struck Kargan like a physical blow. She was right, and the realization was profoundly unsettling. For the first time in his career, he found himself questioning the fundamental premise of the Empire's approach. What exactly are you proposing? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. A new kind of relationship, Mira explained. Etheria and its allied outer colonies remain independent with our own governance and cultural autonomy. In exchange, we share certain technologies like the FTL drive system and establish trade agreements that benefit both our civilizations. The Empire doesn't make such arrangements, Kargan stated flatly. Perhaps it's time they started, Ambassador Thel suggested. The universe is vast, Colonel. Conquest is resource-intensive and often breeds resentment that must be continually managed. Imagine if those resources could be redirected toward mutual advancement instead. Kargan glanced at Science Director Selene, who was still examining the FTL schematics with undisguised wonder. She met his eyes briefly, and he could read the message there clearly. This technology alone is worth considering their proposal. I will need to consult with the Supreme Council, Kargan finally said. This goes beyond my authority as an envoy. Of course, Mira nodded. We anticipated as much. Take these preliminary schematics as a demonstration of our good faith. She handed him a data crystal. They contain enough information to verify our claims, but not enough to replicate the technology without our cooperation. Kargan accepted the crystal, feeling its weight in his palm, so small, yet potentially so significant for the future of the Empire. One more thing, Colonel Mira added, as they prepared to conclude the meeting. When you return to your council, please remind them of what happened when your conquest vessel arrived. We disabled your systems once without causing harm. That was a choice. The implied threat wasn't lost on Kargan, though it was delivered with a diplomat's smile. As his ship departed Peace Station, Kargan stood alone in his quarters, the data crystal glowing softly on his desk. His mind was a turbulent sea of conflicting thoughts, duty to the Empire's traditional methods, warring with the undeniable potential of the alternative path the Etherians had proposed. Captain Rovar's voice came through the intercom, interrupting his contemplation. "Colonel, we're clear of Etherian space and preparing for the jump back to Imperial territory." "Proceed, Captain," Kargan responded automatically. After the communication ended, he picked up the crystal, turning it in his fingers. Within this tiny object lay not just revolutionary technology, but a revolutionary idea, one that challenged the very foundation of the Empire's expansion philosophy. And now, it was his responsibility to present both to the Supreme Council. 1 week later, Kargan once again stood before the Supreme Council, the polished black floor reflecting the tension evident in the councilors' postures. This time, however, he stood with his shoulders squared and his head high, the data crystal from Etheria secured in a protective case at his side. "You were sent to assess their technology," Colonel High Counselor Thrain stated, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Report your findings." Kargan took a deep breath. "High Counselor, esteemed members of the Council, the Etherians possess technology significantly beyond our current capabilities in several key areas. Their defensive systems, as we already discovered, can selectively disable specific ship functions without causing physical damage. But more importantly, they have developed a faster-than-light drive system that surpasses our own by a considerable margin." He placed the data crystal in the reader at the center of the chamber. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the same schematics that had so impressed Science Director Celine. "According to our preliminary analysis, this drive system would reduce fuel consumption by 67%, while simultaneously increasing maximum velocity," Kargan explained. "The implications for our fleet mobility, resource transportation, and territorial control would be transformative." The council members leaned forward, examining the projected schematics with varying degrees of comprehension and interest. "And they simply gave you this information?" Councillor Rexon asked, suspicion evident in his tone. "They provided enough data to verify their claims," Kargan clarified. "Not enough to replicate the technology without their cooperation." "So they wish to bargain," High Counselor Thrain concluded. "What are their terms?" Here it was, the moment Kargan had been both anticipating and dreading. "They propose an alliance, High Counselor. Not integration into the Empire, but a relationship between independent entities." Silence fell over the chamber, heavy and charged. "An alliance," Counselor Varda finally repeated, as if the word tasted foreign on her tongue. "The Empire does not form alliances. We conquer, we integrate, we rule." And yet, Counselor Elira noted quietly, this single planet has already demonstrated its ability to resist our standard conquest protocols. Perhaps their proposal merits consideration. "It is an insult," Counselor Rexon slammed his fist on the table. "They should be made an example of. We should return with a full battle fleet and reduce their civilization to ash. And lose access to this technology forever." Kargan couldn't stop himself from challenging the counselor. With respect, that would be short-sighted. Rexon's face darkened with fury at the subordinate's contradiction. High Counselor Thrain raised a hand, silencing further outbursts. "Colonel Kargan, you were sent as an envoy to assess their capabilities and determine the best approach for acquiring their technology. Your recommendation—" Kargan hesitated, aware that his next words might well determine not only his own fate, but potentially the future direction of the Empire itself. "High Counselor, esteemed Council, my recommendation is that we consider the Etherian proposal, not out of weakness, but out of strategic pragmatism." He straightened, meeting Thrain's piercing gaze directly. "The Empire has always prided itself on adaptability. Perhaps this situation calls for an evolution in our approach." You would have us abandon our conquest mandate, Rexon demanded incredulously. I would have us secure this technology, Kargan countered, by whatever means proves most effective. If diplomacy achieves what conquest could not, is that not still a victory for the Empire? The council members exchanged glances, silent communications passing between them. Finally, High Counselor Thrain spoke. You make a compelling argument, Colonel. However, such a fundamental shift in imperial policy cannot be decided hastily. She turned to her fellow counselors. We will deliberate on this matter in private. Colonel Kargan, you are dismissed for now. Remain available for further questioning. Kargan bowed and withdrew from the chamber, the weight of the Empire's future pressing heavily upon his shoulders. Outside, in the antechamber, Science Director Selene waited, her expression anxious. How did they respond? She asked in a hushed voice. They're deliberating, Kargan replied, his voice betraying his exhaustion. Rexon wants to return with a battle fleet. Elira seems open to the alliance concept. The others? It's difficult to say. Selene shook her head. A battle fleet would be disastrous. If the Etherians could disable one conquest vessel, what's to stop them from disabling an entire fleet? And we'd lose all possibility of accessing their FTL technology. I made that point, Kargan assured her. But centuries of conquest aren't easily set aside. The Council must weigh immediate pride against long-term advantage. And what do you believe is the right course, Colonel? Selene asked, studying his face carefully. Kargan considered the question, one that had haunted him throughout the journey back from Etheria. I believe that true strength lies in recognizing when to adapt. The Empire has always prided itself on technological superiority. If maintaining that superiority requires a new approach, even one as unprecedented as an alliance, then that is the path we should choose. Selene's eyes widened slightly at his response. That's not what I expected you to say. You've always been one of our most dedicated conquest commanders. Perhaps meeting an adversary who can't be conquered makes one reconsider the limitations of conquest, Kargan replied with a thin smile. Before Selene could respond, the chamber doors reopened, and an Imperial guard summoned Kargan back inside. The Council's deliberations had been surprisingly brief. Standing once more before the 7 counselors, Kargan prepared himself for whatever decision they had reached, and for whatever consequences that decision might hold for his career and his life. High Counselor Thrain's expression revealed nothing as she addressed him. Colonel Kargan, after careful consideration, the Supreme Council has reached a determination regarding the Etherian situation. Kargan stood rigidly at attention waiting. While the concept of an alliance as they propose it runs counter to our established protocols, Thrain continued, the potential value of their faster-than-light technology cannot be dismissed. Therefore, you are authorized to return to Etheria and negotiate what we shall term a special integration arrangement. Relief flooded through Kargan, though he was careful not to let it show on his face. Thank you, High Counselor. May I ask what parameters will guide these negotiations? You may ensure the Etherians retain certain autonomies in exchange for full technological cooperation, Thrain explained. However, they must acknowledge the Empire's paramount authority in interstellar matters and accept Imperial protection. It wasn't the equal alliance the Etherians had proposed, but it was far closer than Kargan had dared hope the Council would approve. It was a beginning, a crack in the monolithic conquest doctrine that had guided the Empire for generations. I understand, High Counselor. I will do my utmost to secure terms favorable to the Empire. See that you do, Colonel. Thrain's voice hardened slightly. Remember that while we are willing to explore this alternative approach, our patience is not unlimited. If diplomacy fails to secure their technology within a reasonable time frame, more traditional methods remain available to us. The threat was clear if subtle. Kargan bowed in acknowledgement. Of course, High Counselor. When shall I depart? Immediately. A diplomatic vessel is being prepared as we speak. Thrain leaned forward, fixing him with her penetrating gaze. "Do not fail the Empire in this, Colonel Kargan." "I will not, High Counselor." As he left the council chamber for the second time, Kargan found his mind turning to Major Mira Owens and her calm confidence during their first confrontation. He had underestimated her then, underestimated her world and its capabilities. He would not make the same mistake twice. This time he would approach Etheria not as a conqueror, certain of victory, but as a diplomat, open to possibility. It was an unfamiliar role, but perhaps he reflected it was time for both him and the Empire to embrace the unfamiliar. 3 days later, Kargan's diplomatic vessel, once again, approached Etherian space. This time, however, he felt none of the conqueror's confidence that had accompanied his first visit. Instead, a strange mixture of trepidation and possibility filled him as Peace Station came into view. "We're being hailed," Colonel Captain Rovar reported from his communication station. "Put it through," Kargan ordered, straightening the formal diplomatic attire that still felt alien compared to his familiar uniform. Major Owens appeared on screen, her expression guarded, but not unwelcoming. "Colonel Kargan, back so soon. I trust your council found our proposal intriguing." "Intriguing enough to send me back with authorization to negotiate terms," Major Kargan confirmed. "Request permission to dock at Peace Station." "Permission granted," she replied. "Same docking bay as before. I look forward to continuing our discussion." The transmission ended, and Captain Rovar turned to Kargan with undisguised curiosity. "What exactly did the Council authorize, sir, if I may ask?" "A special integration arrangement." Kargan quoted his mouth, twisting slightly at the euphemism. Not quite the independent alliance they proposed, but significantly more autonomy than any other world has retained after joining the Empire. "A compromise, then," Rovar observed. "Of sorts," Kargan agreed. "Whether it will be enough for the Etherians remains to be seen." The same circular conference room awaited them at Peace Station, though this time the Etherian delegation had expanded to include several additional scientific and diplomatic personnel. Major Owens greeted Kargan with the same hand-extending gesture as before, which he returned with slightly more confidence. "Welcome back to Peace Station, Colonel," she said. "I understand your council has authorized actual negotiations." "They have," Kargan confirmed, taking his seat at the round table. "They were particularly impressed by the FTL drive technology you shared." "As we anticipated," Dr. Reyes remarked with a knowing smile. "However," Kargan continued carefully, "the concept of a fully independent alliance as you proposed goes against centuries of Imperial protocol. My authorization extends to negotiating what we're calling a special integration arrangement." Commander Jackson's expression darkened immediately. "Integration. So they still expect conquest just by another name." "Not conquest," Kargan corrected quickly. "The arrangement would preserve significant Etherian autonomy. Your governance structures, cultural practices, educational systems could remain largely unchanged." "Largely," Ambassador Thel repeated his diplomatic training, evident in the way he maintained a neutral expression despite the obvious tension. "And what would change, Colonel?" Kargan took a deep breath. "The Empire would expect acknowledgement of its paramount authority in interstellar matters. Etheria would accept Imperial protection and contribute resources to the broader Imperial economy, though at preferential rates compared to fully integrated worlds." A heavy silence fell over the conference room. Major Owens exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding. "That still sounds remarkably like conquest, Colonel," she said quietly. "Just with a lighter touch than usual." "It's a significant departure from standard Imperial protocol," Kargan insisted. "No other world has retained such autonomy after joining the Empire." "And that's supposed to make us feel privileged?" Commander Jackson asked sarcastically. "It's a starting point for negotiation," Kargan clarified, feeling increasingly out of his depth in this diplomatic exchange. "The Supreme Council has authorized me to be flexible on certain points." Major Owens studied him for a long moment, her gaze uncomfortably perceptive. "You personally advocated for this approach, didn't you?" Colonel, against more traditional voices on your council? Kargan hesitated before acknowledging the truth with a slight nod. I presented the strategic benefits of securing your technology through diplomatic means, rather than military force. A small smile touched Mira's lips. Then perhaps there's hope for these negotiations after all. She turned to her colleagues. Let's hear the Colonel out. What specific terms is the Empire proposing? For the next several hours, they delved into the details of the arrangement Kargan had been authorized to negotiate. Each point became a small battlefield of its own, the extent of Etherian autonomy, the nature of resource contributions, the parameters of technological exchange, the degree of imperial presence permitted in Etherian space. Throughout the discussions, Kargan found himself repeatedly impressed by the Etherians' diplomatic skill. They yielded on minor points, while holding firm on those most important to them, creating a sense of progress, without surrendering their core principles. By the time they paused for refreshments, the outlines of a potential agreement had begun to take shape, one that Kargan realized with some surprise differed significantly from what the Supreme Council had initially authorized. Somehow, the Etherians had reshaped the Empire's special integration arrangement into something much closer to their original alliance proposal, all while making it seem as though they were the ones making concessions. As the Etherian delegation withdrew temporarily for private consultations, Captain Rovar approached Kargan with evident concern. Colonel, these terms have evolved well beyond our initial parameters, he murmured. The Council may not approve. I am aware, Kargan replied quietly. But consider the alternative. If we refuse to compromise further, we leave with nothing. No technology, no agreement, and the same military impasse we faced before. But sir, your position, your career, will be secure if I return with access to their FTL technology, Kargan interrupted. The Council cares more about results than methods, Captain. If this agreement secures that technology, they'll accept the rest. Rovar looked unconvinced but nodded respectfully. As you say, sir. When the Etherian delegation returned, Major Owens carried herself with a new air of resolution. Colonel, we've discussed your proposal extensively, she announced. While certain aspects remain problematic from our perspective, we believe we can work toward an arrangement that satisfies both parties' core interests. I am pleased to hear that Kargan responded, relief evident in his voice, despite his attempt at professional detachment. However, she continued, there is one non-negotiable condition that must be addressed before we proceed further. Kargan tensed. And that is reciprocity, Mira stated simply. Any arrangement between Etheria and the Empire must be founded on mutual exchange, not one-sided contribution. For every technology we share, the Empire must share one of comparable value. For every resource we provide, equivalent consideration must be returned. The Empire doesn't, Kargan began automatically, then stopped himself, reconsidering. That would represent a fundamental shift in how the Empire conducts its affairs. Exactly, Mira nodded. That's precisely what we're proposing, Colonel. Not just a special arrangement for Etheria, but the beginning of a new approach to interstellar relations for the Empire itself. Kargan stared at her, suddenly understanding the full scope of what the Etherians were attempting. They didn't merely want to preserve their independence. They sought to transform the Empire itself, to challenge centuries of conquest doctrine at its very foundation. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Such a shift would face significant resistance within the Empire, he said carefully. No doubt, Ambassador Thel acknowledged. But consider the potential benefits, Colonel. Reduced military expenditure. Access to innovations from cultures allowed to develop along their own paths, rather than being homogenized into imperial uniformity. Diplomatic influence extending beyond the reach of your fleets. A more stable interstellar community, Dr. Reyes added. One based on mutual benefit rather than dominance and submission. The vision they painted was compelling and completely alien to everything Kargan had been taught throughout his career. And yet, he could not dismiss it as mere idealism. The Etherians had already demonstrated their ability to resist imperial conquest through technological innovation. How many other worlds might have valuable contributions to offer if approached as potential allies rather than future subjects? I cannot guarantee the Supreme Council will accept such a condition, Kargan finally said. It goes beyond my current authorization. We understand, Mira replied. But it is essential to any agreement we might reach. Take our full proposal, including this condition, back to your council. Let them consider the possibilities it represents. After another day of detailed negotiations, Kargan departed Peace Station with a comprehensive proposal document, one that bore only passing resemblance to the special integration arrangement he had been authorized to negotiate. Instead, it outlined what the Etherians termed a reciprocal partnership treaty, with principles of mutual exchange and respect for sovereignty at its core. As his ship broke orbit from Etheria, Kargan stood alone in his quarters, the proposal document displayed on his personal console. He knew that presenting this to the Supreme Council would be the greatest challenge of his career, perhaps even a career-ending move, if they viewed it as overstepping his authority, or worse, as sympathy for foreign interests. And yet, he could not bring himself to regret the path he had chosen. Something had shifted within him during these negotiations, a change as profound as it was unexpected. The certainty that had once guided his conquest missions had given way to a more complex understanding of strength and strategy. Colonel, Captain Rovar's voice came through the intercom. We're prepared for the jump back to Imperial space. Kargan gazed one last time at the blue-green planet receding on his view screen. Proceed, Captain, he ordered. Then, almost to himself, he added, Why run when you don't need to chase twice? The return to Imperial space brought Kargan once more before the Supreme Council, the gleaming black floor beneath him, now a familiar stage for what had become the most consequential mission of his career. The 7 counselors regarded him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. Colonel Kargan. High Counselor Thrain began, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. You return from Etheria with an agreement, I trust. I return with a proposal, High Counselor, Kargan replied carefully. One that differs significantly from my original authorization, but which I believe merits the Council's serious consideration. Counselor Rexon's expression darkened immediately. You exceeded your authority. I explored all possible avenues for securing access to Etherian technology, Kargan countered. The document I've brought represents the only terms under which they are willing to share their innovations. He uploaded the proposal to the Council's display system. The holographic projection materialized before each counselor the title, Reciprocal Partnership Treaty, hovering prominently above the detailed text. Partnership, Counselor Varda read with evident distaste. Reciprocal. These are not imperial terms, Colonel. No, Kargan acknowledged. They are not. But they may represent a new opportunity for the Empire, one that secures advanced technology, without the resource expenditure of conquest, or the administrative burden of integration. Explain. High Counselor Thrain commanded, her eyes never leaving the projected document. For the next hour, Kargan outlined the proposal in detail, the principles of mutual technological exchange, the preservation of Etherian sovereignty, the framework for cooperative defense and resource development, the potential for expanding this model to other worlds if proven successful. As he spoke, he observed the counselors' reactions carefully. Rexon's hostility never wavered, while Varda's initial skepticism seemed to harden into opposition. Elira, by contrast, appeared increasingly intrigued, occasionally nodding as he described particular benefits to the Empire. The others, including High Counselor Thrain, maintained carefully neutral expressions, revealing nothing of their thoughts. When he had finished his presentation, silence fell over the chamber, heavy with the weight of imminent decision. This proposal, Counselor Rexon finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger, would undermine the very foundation of imperial expansion. For generations we have conquered and integrated. It is who we are. It is how we have become the dominant force in known space. And yet, Counselor Elira countered thoughtfully. Perhaps evolution is necessary for continued dominance. The Etherians have already demonstrated that our traditional methods may not always succeed. If this approach secures their technology without the expenditure of military resources, it sets a dangerous precedent, Varda insisted. If one world can negotiate terms, others will demand the same consideration. Only if they possess something of equivalent value, Kargan pointed out. Most worlds do not have technology capable of disabling our vessels or FTL drives superior to our own. And those that do, Elira added, are precisely the ones we should be establishing relations with, rather than attempting to subjugate. Imagine if we had approached Etheria as potential allies. From the beginning, we might already be implementing their FTL technology across our fleet. The debate continued, growing increasingly heated as the counselors divided along ideological lines. Throughout the exchange, High Counselor Thrain remained silent, her piercing gaze moving from speaker to speaker, assessing and calculating. Finally, she raised a hand instantly, silencing the chamber. Colonel Kargan, you have given us much to consider. The Council will deliberate in private. You are dismissed until we reach our decision. Kargan bowed and withdrew the tension of the Council chamber, following him like a shadow. In the antechamber, Science Director Celine awaited him, her expression anxious. How did they respond? She asked in a hushed voice. As expected, Kargan replied grimly. Rexon and Varda oppose any deviation from tradition. Elira sees the strategic advantages. The others, including Thrain, are keeping their positions close for now. And what happens if they reject the proposal? Kargan's jaw tightened. Then we face a difficult choice. Return to Etheria with terms they've already refused, or... He didn't finish the thought. Or attempt conquest despite knowing their defensive capabilities, Celine completed for him. Neither option seems promising. No, Kargan agreed, they don't. They waited in tense silence for nearly 3 hours before the summons came. When Kargan re-entered the council chamber, he was immediately struck by a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a sense of resolution, though whether favorable or fatal to his proposal, he could not yet determine. High Counselor Thrain's expression remained unreadable as she addressed him. Colonel Kargan, the Supreme Council, has reached a decision regarding the Etherian proposal. Kargan stood at rigid attention, bracing himself for whatever would come. This reciprocal partnership treaty represents a radical departure from imperial tradition, Thrain continued. It challenges principles that have guided our expansion for generations. Many on this council, she glanced briefly toward Rexon and Varda, view such departures with deep concern. Kargan's heart sank. This was the preamble to rejection. However, Thrain went on, the Empire has not survived and thrived by clinging blindly to tradition when circumstances demand adaptation. The reality before us is clear. Etheria possesses technology we want, and they have demonstrated the ability to resist our standard conquest protocols. A flicker of hope kindled in Kargan's chest. Therefore, by majority decision, the Supreme Council authorizes you to return to Etheria and formalize this reciprocal partnership treaty as a pilot program, a test case for a potential alternative approach to imperial expansion in specific, limited circumstances. Relief flooded through Kargan, though he maintained his rigid posture. Thank you, High Counselor. The Empire will benefit greatly from Etherian technology. Let us hope so, Thrain replied, a warning edge in her voice. Because this decision does not come without conditions or consequences, Colonel. I understand. You will personally oversee the implementation of this treaty. Your career now stands, or falls with its success. Her eyes bored into him with laser intensity. If this partnership yields the technological advantages you've promised, your insight will be recognized and rewarded. If it fails, or if the Etherians prove untrustworthy, you alone will bear responsibility for the Empire's humiliation. I accept those terms, High Counselor. Furthermore, she continued, this approach remains experimental and exceptional. It does not represent a wholesale shift in imperial policy. The majority of our expansion will continue to follow established conquest protocols. Of course, Kargan acknowledged, recognizing the political necessity of this limitation. You will depart immediately to finalize the agreement, Thrain concluded. The Empire expects results, Colonel. Do not disappoint us. I will not, High Counselor. As Kargan withdrew from the chamber, for what he hoped would be the final time, a strange sense of accomplishment washed over him. He had not set out to become an architect of diplomatic innovation. As a conquest commander, his path had seemed clear: expand the Empire's reach through military superiority and unwavering resolve. Yet, here he stood preparing to implement a partnership treaty with a world that had forced him to retreat. It was not the victory he had once envisioned, but perhaps he reflected it represented something more valuable, an evolution in his understanding of true strength. 1 week later, Kargan stood on the observation deck of Peace Station, watching as the ceremonial signatures were applied to the Reciprocal Partnership Treaty. Major Owens, now designated as Etheria's official diplomatic liaison to the Empire, completed her signature with a flourish and offered the stylus to Kargan. A historic moment, Colonel, she observed quietly as he took the instrument. The first equal partnership between the interplanetary empire and an independent world. The first of its kind, Kargan agreed, applying his own signature to the document. Though perhaps not the last. The assembled delegates from both sides applauded politely as the signing was completed. The atmosphere in the observation deck was one of cautious optimism, not the triumphant celebration of conquest, but something more measured and perhaps more sustainable. As the formal proceedings concluded, and the delegates dispersed into smaller conversational groups, Mira drew Kargan aside to the viewport overlooking Etheria. I must admit, she said, gazing at her home planet below, when your conquest vessel first appeared in our orbit, I didn't envision this outcome. Nor did I, Kargan acknowledged with a wry smile. I expected a routine conquest mission my 27th. And instead I found myself questioning assumptions I'd held my entire career. He turned to face her directly. You know, when we disabled your ship and told you to leave, you could have pursued us, attacked while we were vulnerable. Why didn't you? Mira smiled. Why would we chase you twice? We'd already demonstrated our capability. Pursuing you would have only reinforced the idea that conflict was inevitable. A lesson the Empire is still learning, Kargan observed. But learning nonetheless, she pointed out. This treaty may be experimental from the Empire's perspective, but it's a beginning. Yes, Kargan agreed, a beginning. As they stood in contemplative silence, Captain Rovar approached, his expression troubled. Colonel, our vessel is prepared for departure. The Supreme Council expects a preliminary report within 3 standard days. Thank you, Captain. I'll be aboard shortly. After Rovar withdrew, Kargan turned back to Mira. Duty calls. Implementation teams will arrive within the week to begin the technological exchange process. We'll be ready, she assured him. And Colonel, thank you for seeing another way forward. Kargan inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her words. It seems I had much to learn about true strength, Major Owens. As do we all, she replied with a smile. Later, as the Iron Resolve broke orbit from Etheria, no longer a conquest vessel, but redesignated as a diplomatic courier, Kargan stood on the bridge watching the blue-green planet recede on the view screen. Unlike his first departure, filled with humiliation and anger, this time he felt a curious sense of possibility. Course set for Imperial space, Colonel, reported the navigation officer. Shall we proceed? Kargan nodded. Proceed, Lieutenant. As the stars elongated into streaks of light around them, signaling the jump to faster-than-light travel, Kargan reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. He had arrived at Etheria as a conqueror, certain of his path and purpose. He departed as something different, perhaps a diplomat, perhaps a visionary, perhaps simply a pragmatist, who had recognized when tradition must yield to new realities. The Aetherians had asked why they would chase the Empire twice. In turn, Kargan now understood why the Empire need not persist in a conquest that served neither side's true interests. "Why run," he murmured to himself, "when you don't need to chase twice?" The question hung in the air of the bridge unanswered, but resonant with possibility, not just for Aetheria and the Empire, but for countless worlds among the stars. Perhaps strength lay not always in pursuit, but sometimes in the wisdom to recognize when a different path might lead to greater victories. As the iron resolve accelerated into the depths of space, Kargan allowed himself a small smile. His 27th conquest mission had failed spectacularly. His first diplomatic mission had succeeded beyond expectation. And in that paradox lay a lesson worth learning even for an empire built on conquest.